Okay, everyone. It is now time to begin today's breakfast forum. My name is Enrico Stradiotto. I'm here to bring greetings from the board. I'm the incoming president for 2021 and glad to be here and excited to participate. I actually think, I hate to admit, that this is my first YP breakfast forum. So very excited to be part of today and to listen in. Certainly the topic of asset management is something I don't know too much about. So I'm excited to hear our speaker with what she has to say. I'd just like to say kudos to the YP committee. I believe this is their second virtual event, and great for them to get ahead of that technological curve and put on an event like this. With OPWA, we recently signed on with the Zoom virtual platform, so we expect to put out more events like this in the future. Just for those that are not members of OPWA, just wanted to give you a little bit of background about our organization. We're a not-for-profit association consisting of professional public works practitioners. We have over 630 members. This is across both the public and private sectors. And the OPWA is the Ontario chapter of the Canadian Public Works Association. And we're just one of 55 chapters of the American Public Works Association. Within the chapter of Ontario, we have two branches, the West Central branch and the Ottawa Valley branch. Our board is a sizable group, 25 board members, and we have several working committees within this chapter. So we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. I just wanted to highlight some recent activity in terms of updating the strategic plan for the chapter, and want to underline our mission statement, connecting the public works community. And the use of the word connecting, it's a key word. It has a lot of diverse meaning when we sat down and developed this for the strategic plan. When we talk about connecting, it's an important element of relationship building and professional development on a personal level. When we talk about public works, it's a very vast industry sector, and many intersectors or subsectors within public works. So it's important to have that link with the chapter that OPWA provides across all those different subsectors. And certainly as a chapter in the province of Ontario, we're a large province. Everything is, in terms of economy and business, is fast paced, it's evolving. So it's very important to stay connected. Obviously, COVID-19 was a big interrupter for everyone, a big interrupter for the workplace, for economy, and certainly for family life. I've got 3 young children, so that's been interesting. But this is an opportunity that OPWA has had to sit down and really reset and respond to this type of a situation. And we're doing that, and you can see and expect more coming from the chapter in the near months. Certainly, in terms of staying connected, you always have the ability to log on to our website or to join any of our social platforms and stay involved and connected with what's going on with the association. So as mentioned, with OPWA, with many things happening at the chapter, I guess my only suggestion to you is to be involved. And the more you're involved, as they say, you'll get twice back what you put in. There's many opportunities. You can attend different events. You can join other committees, raise a hand, ask a question, encourage your colleagues to participate in the chapter. There's a lot of great opportunities with OPWA. And namely, we do have 9 committees, and maybe one of these committees will appeal to your interest. We also have additional committees involved with some of the events at the chapter. So certainly joining and being part of the YP committee is an opportunity to start with the chapter and get your feet planted, but there's more opportunity ahead of you. So please consider that in the future. Certainly, before I end off here, I just want to give a big thank you to all the sponsors of OPWA. Without their support, none of these events could happen. And I believe even some of the participants of today's session are some of these sponsors. So thank you for, again, for your support. Maybe one thing to touch upon as we get started with the session, just some general rules in terms of conducting ourselves for today. Some of you who may not be familiar with Zoom. First of all, as participants, please respect the speakers and presenters for today. We ask you that you keep your video turned off and your microphone muted at all times. There will be an opportunity to address questions at the conclusion of the webinar. What we ask that you do is that you place your questions within the chat box during the webinar, and that gives us an opportunity to list the questions and address the questions one by one. So for some of you to do that that are not familiar with Zoom, just take your cursor towards the bottom of the screen, and as you move your cursor down towards the bottom, you'll open up a lower taskbar within Zoom, and in that taskbar you'll see a chat option, and the chat box will open and you can type your questions. So we welcome as many questions as possible. Lastly, this session is being recorded. We want to make it available to any members that cannot participate in today's session. So just be conscious of that. Okay, so with that, I think lastly, I just also wanted to note in terms of greetings from the board, we also have a fellow board member with me, Angela Story. I believe some of you may have met her in the last session. She's the outgoing president, or past president, I should say, for the chapter. So, and then we also have the executive director, Brian Barber, who is participating. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Tanya, and she'll get things started.
Thank you, Enrico. Can you hear me well?
Yes, you're coming through great.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Tanya Zlateva, and I'm the current Young Professional Chair. And as such, with the group, we organized this event, and I'm very pleased to host it. For those of you who don't know, I just wanted to say a few words about the event. It's an event that we usually do every year in person, but considering the COVID-19 situation, we decided to do 2 online sessions, and this is the second online session of that event. Today's session is going to be more technically oriented. It's about asset management, and today's speaker is Bernadette O'Connor from WSP. She's an industry expert in asset management, and her experience dates back to being a first-generation municipal asset manager in New Zealand. Her advice is sought after, and she's currently participating in several international working groups to improve the ISO 55000 standards for asset management, and she's an advisor on the FCM's technical working group for the MAMP program. Bernadette also provides a practical tips and tactics column in the Asset Management British Columbia newsletter, and she has been the volunteer editor since it was first published over 10 years ago. She was also one of the primary authors for the International Infrastructure Asset Management Manual, known as the IIMM, and author of the Asset Management Roadmap for Canadian Municipalities. Most recently, Bernadette was elected to be on the board of the Canadian National Asset Management Organization, CNAM. She is also a municipal engineer at heart, and she has given years of voluntary service and continues today being active in sharing, teaching, promoting, and providing practical advice to organizations wanting to improve their asset management capabilities and practices. And now I will pass it to Bernadette so she can share her experience and knowledge with us.
Good morning and welcome everybody. It's always a hang on, I'm just gonna. It's always a bit of a challenge with this type of talk to understand where to start and how much to say about what asset management is, because I'm sure there are people on the call who already know a great deal about asset management. But for those who don't, I should cover a few basics so you can appreciate how a curious mind can make a difference. If you have any specific questions on asset management or want me to talk more about that, put your comments into the chat stream and we can deal with that at the end. So the first point is context. If you don't know what the aim is, you can inadvertently put too much detail into the wrong things or go off on a tangent that consumes time and money and doesn't give you the result you want. And the real shame about that is that if you're not getting the results, we sometimes toss out the process or the tool as not working, when the problem is not the process, but how we're trying to implement it. So the context for asset management, the overarching purpose, what it is designed to help you achieve, is sustainable service delivery. And what that means is being able to deliver and keep delivering a service at a standard that's acceptable, for a price your community can afford, and basically without screwing up the environment. However, for most organisations, aspirations of sustainable service delivery is not what drives them initially. It's usually something more immediate that engages them to want to improve their asset management practices. Now, in Ontario, a big driver is legislation. So is concern that there won't be enough money for replacing assets as they get older, and needing a robust way of prioritising the multitude of issues that you need to deal with. And there are others. So I'd like to take a moment and have a look at what are your drivers. So if you've got a mobile phone or you're on the computer, which you'll be, you can use either. If you go to www.menti.com and you put in the code 367907, then you'll be able to put in a couple of your drivers and we'll be able to see it on the screen. I'll just change over to the other screen now. So it's www, it's at the top of the screen there, menti.com. And then put in the code 367907. So already we can see that there's quite a diverse range of drivers for people, some similarity there with regards levels of service and cost, money, value. Just wait to see if a few more might pop their comments in. Okay, so just in case we have some newbies on the call, I'll briefly cover what asset management is and how it helps. So asset management is the whole suite, all the processes, business processes, tools, documents, the data, analysis processes, everything that you need to support your decision makers so that they can make wise, evidence-based decisions to deliver the service. So it can be said that asset management practices, when done well, they light up the whole playing field. So your decision makers can know what the options are and the consequences and benefits that they have to trade off against costs and risks. Now, this kind of visibility is key. If we know something is coming up, we have time to plan, time to save, we can mitigate adverse impacts. With asset management practices, we empower ourselves and our decision makers to make better decisions and get better outcomes. Outcomes that just simply aren't possible if you're operating in an entirely reactive or a predominantly reactive environment with no visibility of what's coming up in the medium and long term. To give you some examples of this, I had working with an engineer once, and he was not a great advocate for asset management. And, you know, to be fair, he didn't have a lot of money, and so he had to prioritize, and he initially thought asset management as being one of those luxury items. And I can't fault him for that, because I was in his shoes, you know, many years ago in New Zealand, and I thought it was a whole lot of bureaucratic red tape passed down by the government, making me do extra reporting and not giving me any money to do it, and taking me away from my real job, my day job, and actually running the services. And it wasn't until I started doing the process that I realized how powerful it was. And I also began to realize all the things that I didn't actually know when I went to try and find the evidence and write it down. All the things that we instinctively knew, and we think it's recorded somewhere, but it actually isn't. And if we walk out the door, so does that, or that institutional knowledge as well. So anyway, I was working with him, and to prove the point about the need to have a long-term forecast, we did some numbers, and we just took the forward renewal program for one of his asset groups, and we showed him what the graph looked like, how much money each year he would need if we just looked at 3 years, and what the average would be, and therefore what the reserve levels needed to be as an average. And then we looked at 10 years, and then we looked at 30 years, and then we looked at 100 years. And it was vastly different, because in the small window, even in the 20-year window, they were missing with long life assets. We were actually looking at sewer, and with the long life assets, there was a whole bunch of them that had gone in at the same time, that were all going to come of age around the same time, that were just outside of that window. And if we didn't expand our horizon, we wouldn't have known they were there, and therefore we wouldn't have been providing for them. Now, you don't always have to be looking at a 100-year window, but a 100-year window does give you context, because it allows you to see what the overall impact is of a replacement of every asset in your portfolio. So suffice to say that if you know what's coming up, you always have a lot more options and opportunity to do treatments. You can, if you've got a particular peak year that you think is unaffordable, or it might be impractical, you don't have enough contractors or enough internal staff to manage that level of capital work in 1 year. So you will want to spread that. If you know it's coming up, you can then plan to spread that out over maybe a 5-year period. Do some a little earlier and leave some to a little later than the ideal time for replacement. Because of this, your risks and costs are always less. When you don't know something's coming up, or you have a very short window that you're looking at, then you have no time to be able to save the adequate money for it. So you're bound then into a debt-funded process for your continuing to debt fund your capital projects, capital renewals projects. But there's also a lot more costs and risks. If you don't know the age of your network, the expected lifespan, and have some at least ballpark prediction of theoretically about when are those assets going to need replacement, so that you can do the numbers, provide, start building up some reserves, or being able to justify why the reserves are being built up, things like that, then it's in a reactive mode, it always costs more money, and there's always risks that are higher than in a planned environment. So with all this talk about visibility and evidence-based decisions and so on, you might think that asset management is mostly about data. And yes, data is a significant part of asset management, but it's more about what you do with the data, how you turn that data into meaningful information that will drive and direct an appropriate course of action. One of my training modules that I have on data management, I take the participants through an exercise, because I believe that if you're collecting information, you're collecting data, okay, and that data is not impacting a decision, then it better be necessary to collect it for a legislative requirement, okay? Because if you're not impacting a decision, complying with legislation, or information that provides you with direction for your decision makers, which again is an impact of decision making. If it's not impacting decision making, then you've got to look seriously at it and say, should this be impacting decisions, and what is stopping it? And usually it's the analysis, or it's analyzing the information in a way that is consumable by the decision makers, in a way that they can understand it and take it into account in making their decision. If the data that you're collecting isn't required for legislation, and it won't impact a decision. Why are you collecting it? So you can be discerning about how much of what kind of information you collect. And if you're going to go to the effort and energy and cost of collecting it, make darn sure that it's actually being used. Go the extra step, and do the analysis so that it can be included in the decision-making process. It's like the box of bits and pieces that sit in the shed and have been sitting there for 10, 15 years, for maybe one day, someday I might do something with it. And by the time you think you might do something with it, it's so out of date and old that it's not useful anymore. So making sure that data actually gets translated into knowledge and then into action, affecting those decision makers. And this is where you can leverage a curious mind to make a difference. So someone with a curious mind, they notice things and they have the patience to methodically investigate to resolve them. So a person with a curious mind won't necessarily accept at face value, somebody did this analysis and this is the answer. They will actually notice, does that answer make sense? Are the numbers in the right ballpark? It's that common sense view of things. They also ask the why questions, which is a great way to learn new things for themselves, but it also challenges the current process. Sometimes it's not until we have to answer somebody's why, or even answer our own why, that we notice a gap or a weakness in a process, or realize it hasn't been kept up with change. Nothing better than having to explain something to somebody else. You really find out how appropriate it is, the process is. In the same way, a person with a curious mind will seek to understand something, and that naturally proofs the logic of anything. And a curious mind's always open to new ideas. They don't have an attachment to the status quo, and doing something just because that's the way we've always done it would not satisfy somebody with a curious mind. They would require some other logic for why do you do it that particular way? Why wouldn't you look at an alternative? And when they do think of other options or enhancements to improvements to an existing option, then they have the interest and the drive to test the option and report the results. They have a positive spirit that seeks betterment both for themselves to know and understand more, and for whatever they're engaged in, whoever they're working with, and whoever they are working for. If you want to build or enhance a curious mind, one of the key things you have to learn to do is to be detached from the status quo. Now, I don't mean that in a disinterested way, but in a way that makes you open to other possibilities. And this is where you can really leverage asset management information and look at the decision-making processes. Now, when part of asset management is because it's all about making better decisions so that you can get to that sustainable service delivery. Okay, our tomorrow is directly impacted by today's decisions. So that's the thing that you're wanting to enhance and improve, and we're wanting to enhance that by providing visibility of all the issues, providing evidence and analysis for decision makers. But that decision-making process itself also has to be robust. The way that you prioritize things, the criteria that you use for making those decisions, the things that you consider, and the reliability and repeatability of that decision process. I myself, when I was implementing asset management for the municipality that I worked for, it wasn't until I had to document how our capital works decisions were made, the budget process, that I realized, oh my goodness, I need to make some changes here, because I was not prepared to write down that our capital works list of projects was my judgment call. End of discussion. I was in that role of manager, and I sought consultation and input from my area engineers, but at the end of the day, I arbitrarily decided, based on my engineering judgment, what was the priorities and which projects should go up to be funded. And when I had, was considering with asset management, I had to sit down and actually consider the decision-making process, and I realized that's not a responsible way of using public monies. It's not a good governance, and the public should expect more rigor and more transparency and accountability for such decision making. So I sat down with my team, and very quickly we came up, in a matter of an hour, we came up with an outline of a new process. A lot of asset management change is not very difficult to do, where we might put a little bit more effort into one thing, another thing will become a lot easier. Making our decisions defendable by having a process, even if it's just a very simple process, a small flow diagram, one-page diagram, that's it. By making them defendable, it means that we don't have to do that research and write a second report to council because somebody in council had the audacity to challenge our judgment on what the priorities were going to be. And so then we had to go back and do that analysis and put it up to them. If we had a process where that went up the first time, then it saves work. So you can see that the combination of a curious mind applied to a toolbox of asset management practices, data, analysis, documents, decision processes will deliver great benefit to your community. And here we have just 3 of the top hitters of doing asset management well, besides the basic benefits that are written along the bottom there. OREG compliance is a given for Ontario. Having an asset register, an asset list, knowing the state of the assets, forecasting asset replacements, and that leading into having a long-term financial forecast that has a little bit more robustness to it. Add to these other top hitters, which are about being able to provide the evidence for any issue to support your decision makers, so that their investment choices, their decisions are defendable, but also so that the correct the accountability lies in the correct place. Okay, if you are unable to articulate to your elected representatives what the consequences are for a no to a project, okay, or a no to a certain level of funding, then there is no consequence. And they will make the decision based on other parameters, and you will have to try and manage the consequence. Okay, it's very important to be able to articulate the so what if we say no? So what if there's not enough money? So what if we cut this operations or maintenance budget, or don't do that renewal project? Asset management is the tool, the business processes that allows you to answer that question and be able to demonstrate it with some confidence. But also being able to communicate the options in a clear way and the consequences, and providing recommendations that are based on reliable assessment. So this is the benefits that you get out of asset management when you do it well. It requires structure. There is a big hurdle at the very beginning to get over, a whole lot of one-off tasks. So you need to have the budget to help with those one-off tasks, but there's the follow-on after that is not so daunting. For example, it takes a big effort to write your very first asset management plan or your very first policy or strategy, but then updating it, if you've done your other practices well and have your inventory and or your asset register and so on structured, updating it is a small level of effort. You know, doing your levels of service the first time, significant task, and some learning for yourselves as well. But if you engage the right people who bring you along through the process, so they are teaching you as the process is happening, then you can keep those levels of service up to date. You can go through the review process of them at a fraction of the time that it took to do the first one. So the ongoing level of effort further down the track is not so daunting. It's just getting all those one-offs done in the first place and getting the data into a sensible structure so that you can automate calculations for renewal forecasts, for risk ratings, criticality, and for your performance measures on how you are, whether you are actually achieving the goals you set out for. If asset management is not, if you are not finding that it is answering questions for you and making your life easier despite the initial hurdle of work, but if the outcomes of the asset management processes are not making your life easier, then you're doing the wrong things or you're doing them in the wrong way. Go seek better advice. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. My email is on the screen there for you. I'm more than happy that if you want to reach out to me and just ask advice on anything, you know, or connect with me over the internet, I'm more than happy to provide advice and guidance. As Tanya said in my intro, at heart, I am a municipal engineer, and I will be a municipal engineer till I retire and probably beyond. So
Thank you, Bernadette.
Any questions?
So I assume everyone's waiting to hear the whole presentation before they ask the questions. They can start posting them and I would read them out. And in the meantime, there were a couple of questions that I had in mind that I would ask you, and so I can give time to other people to ask their questions. The first question I would ask is, what impact do you think COVID will have on municipal asset management plans, and are those impacts considered long-term?
Okay, well, for a start, COVID has actually put a big dent in this year's program. A lot of municipalities halted projects for two reasons. Initially, it was for safety reasons. The contracting staff, it was not safe for people as everything shut down. But even when that's restarted, of course, the funding issue, and a lot of municipalities have either given relaxations for taxpayers, or they expect that their revenue sources, their user fees and taxation, that people will not be in a financial position to pay their bills, basically, and there could be a long delay in trying to get money in. So with uncertainty about the money and so on, many projects have gone on hold, and that's work that's not done, and there will be an impact for that. Unfortunately, with long life assets, we don't see the impact immediately, but it will have a cost impact on the community. With asset management plans, I think they should be they should take into account COVID in their financial planning and the financial impacts of it, both on the community. Also, you've got to look at the affordability of returning to the same level of service, because also you've got other municipalities who have had to let staff go or lay them off, whether it's temporarily or permanently. And so those are very real issues, that the affordability of the service and what level of service you can provide to match the affordability has to be rationalized.
Yeah, that's true. We are living right now in a lot of uncertainties, and I'm sure municipalities are trying to plan this like that we have never experienced before, or at least not in the near future, near past. So a couple of questions came in. The first one is, what specific performance measures do you use in creating your pavement maintenance plan? And on what basis do you prioritize your spending?
That's a very specific question and not a general asset management question. There are several different options that you can use. Okay, most organizations defer to some form of pavement condition index as being the measure of the performance of the pavement. And prioritization of spending, again, there are several different approaches that they can take, and the key is to understand both the assets and the community that you're dealing with. What is appropriate for Greater Toronto area is not necessarily what's appropriate for Thunder Bay or Neebing. They that's the prioritization of the spending. Most communities have historically done a worst first case, but it's been proven with modeling and calibration of models, tracking of actual events, that worst first is not the best financial option, but it may be the best community relationship option. So there's a number of things to consider. I can't give a more specific answer, I'm sorry, without knowing more about your particular assets and your particular community.
Okay, and if the person who has a question has more, like, he can get in touch. Your information is on the screen and you can have more of an offline discussion about it. The second question, and I think there are two questions here that probably could be related. One of them is, how do you see the future of asset management in Canada and around the world? And the other one question that I see also related is, have you seen change in the asset management process to address climate change?
Okay, so both of those. Asset management in Canada, it's it will go from being it started out when I first came over here. There were very few municipalities doing asset management. There was no legislative requirement to do asset management, and very few people even understood what it was. But then you had a few outliners who started doing it. Since then, watching the benefits of asset management in other countries and so on, and coming to the realization in Canada that there's not enough money to be able to debt fund everybody's renewal programs, especially when so many of the communities were built around about the same time. So a lot of their long life infrastructure, such as their underground pipes, are a similar age and will fail in similar time periods. And the realization there's not enough money to debt fund all of that drove the people beginning to look and say, how do we manage this? And what came out first, of course, was the PSAB 3150, the requirement to do tangible asset, capital asset reporting with your financial reports to understand at least the historical value of those assets and the lifespan of them. For Canada, though, it's moving very rapidly. It's like you get it, and you get it quickly, and then you act on it. There's it makes sense, and you go for it. It's going to become, even though it's regulated in the Ontario environment, most of the other provinces are not regulated, but it's going to become the normal. And communities that don't have any form of asset management, will be the anomaly, not the normal. Most people will do asset management, because what happens is once you start doing it, if you do it well, you start getting the results. And like I said before, those results will be useful to you. If it's done well, they will be useful to you, and you'll realize, oh my goodness, this makes life so much easier. This makes it easy to defend. We don't have to have these big arguments over the priorities of things or the funding of things, because it's now based on this, well-structured information that's analyzed and reported, that you can have confidence in. And we have decision processes that are robust and fair and transparent. That's not to say that there's always opportunity. People make decisions, not data. So there's always opportunity for to cater for nuances. I mean, I did a road upgrade on a street that was not a high priority, but it was a trade-off, because this neighborhood had been so patient with us. They had a significant stormwater problem, and we hadn't been able to fix it, and it was going to be another few years before we could actually put in a permanent fix for their stormwater problem. So it was like, we threw them a consolation. We upgraded their road for them to appease them for putting up with this stormwater issue and being a little more patient with us and so on. Now, for climate change, definitely asset management and climate change fit together. and they have similar ideals, and there's an enormous overlap. Climate change provides information, more information on issues that need to be considered in the decision-making process, issues that need to be considered on funding and on emergency funds, on reserves, on mitigation options. What do you do to try and manage or reduce the adverse consequence of likely impacts as the information coming in becomes more and more robust, more believable, more calibrated to your particular community. So the decision-making process, that's an asset management process. So climate change becomes another piece of the puzzle that you've got to bring together along with the condition of your assets, and multitude of other issues.
Thank you. So we are running a little out of time, but there is one last question that I'm not sure if you can answer it quickly. If it requires a bit more time, we can follow up with the answer after the presentation. The question is, what tips, tactics might you suggest for effectively translating data and communicating consequences to decision makers in a way that capture their attention?
Okay. First thing is, be very cautious about crying wolf. Okay. And also be patient in the process of familiarizing them with the information. Just because you've worked out and realized, oh my goodness, I need this much money going into reserves, doesn't mean to say that they are going to have the same reaction when they see the data. Okay, so make sure that if there is that you're declaring the range of accuracy of the information, that you speak in terms of this is indicating this, that you put in the right context. Other than that, keep it simple and to the point. Use your diagrams, show them, instead of saying, oh, X percent of the network is in poor condition, or we have 25% of the network is in poor condition. Show them some pictures. They don't know what poor condition looks like, or they may have a variety of ideas of what poor condition looks like, and they might think that poor condition's okay. It's their idea of poor might be your fair rating. Okay, so they think, well, that's okay, it's still working, it's not broke yet. So give them some pictures, make it real, and in a way that if you had to explain this to your grandmother, how would you do it? If you've got to explain it to the general public so that they understand what is the issue and what are the options, then you're on the right track. And don't bore them to tears with lots of statistics and graphs and all the rest of it. Give them the nuts and bolts, and then make sure that they know that if they want to delve into the detail, you have the detail, but don't hit them with the detail first.
Thank you, Bernadette. I would like to thank everybody for joining us for today's presentation. The recording of today's presentation will be posted on the OPWA website. We'll be also posting the recording of the previous First Virtual Breakfast Forum session. So for those of you who did not know about it or could not attend it, you will be able to find it as well. And lastly, I just want to say to everybody, for those who are young professionals, if you want to get involved with the OPWA Young Professionals group, please don't hesitate. You can email me and we can further talk about it. Thank you again for joining us, and that concludes today's presentation. Have a great day, everybody.